What is inflation and how to fix it? Communists love inflation. One of the central tenets of the Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx. That's why we've done so many videos and blog articles on communism and why it's so important to understand your enemies and where they're coming from. If you don't understand that you're in a war, you're bound to lose it. Politicians and bankers want to make you think that inflation is something businesses and greedy corporations blanket the world with, impoverishing us all at their whim. It has nothing to do with supply and demand, evil corporations, greedy gougers, record profits, climate change, etc., and any other blatant lie they tell you. Do not listen to the politicians, lawyers, these career politicians. These people have never run businesses in their life, never been in the private sector, never actually done anything. And they're going to sit there and lecture you on why your wealth's being destroyed. At least do not want you coming after them, because you most certainly would if you knew who was destroying your wealth. We've seen this time and again in the Roman Empire, the French Revolution, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and on and on and on. This happens, the 7 stages of empire. This is why we've done all of our videos. Go back, watch our videos, read our blogs on the last couple weeks, last month or two, of all this progression that is leading us through this story that's telling us where we've come from and where we're going and how to protect ourselves. That's the most important thing. How do we get our liberty, our freedom back, and our wealth back? And how do we become financially free? That is the most important thing. The more wealth and financial freedom you have, the more resilience and independence, the less you need overlords, the less you need rules and regulations and red tape and crazy psychopaths telling you what to do. The politicians and the elites and the central bankers, all one and the same, for some sense, the Federal Reserve in the U.S. here, and then you have the ECB and the Bank of Japan, People's Bank of China, all the different central banks around the world. We've been talking about them ad nauseum. They are complete and total blame for the inflationary booms and busts we see throughout the decades. The widening wealth gap between the rich and the poor, the crushing blows of taxation and inflation, all are direct results of the central banks printing endless amounts of currency. And remember, it's currency, not money. We don't have money. Money has to be a store of value. It has to be gold, silver, or inflation, or Bitcoin, which, again, coming up tomorrow, we will have what is Bitcoin truly. Is it the inflation hedge, the store of value that people have touted as? And then you've had a lot of people recently saying that it's not. So we'll dive into that, give you the answer on that. And so, give you our answers. Hopefully you come up with your own conclusions. All of these are results, all these booms and busts are results of the central banks printing endless amounts of currency with the blessing of the politicians. They're in cahoots. The central bankers, I believe, run the world. It's still up for debate whether who's calling the shots. Does the tail wag the dog? Does the dog wag the tail? I believe, though, like I said, it's the central banks across the world that pull the strings. Like the Rothschilds, for hundreds of years, they said, I care not who makes the laws, aka politicians, but give me the power to make money, basically, and I will rule the world. So that is the most important thing to understand what's going on. Central banks are communist by nature. Again, in the Communist Manifesto, one of the central tenets, the whole point is to destroy the wealth of the people and centralize power. Again, if you can't read, you can't write, if you don't have wealth, you are powerless. The elites control you, and that is what they want. That's the Klaus Schwabs of the world, the globalists, these elites everywhere, the Christine Lagardes, the central bankers, the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, all these families that want control. They want a select few, the 1% of 1%, the elites, to have control cradle to grave over your life. This is why this is so important. I'm so impassioned about it. I am so vehemently against tyrants, tyranny, centralization, people want to control my life. I don't want people to control my life. I don't think that most human beings want someone else to control their life and make decisions for them. I'm assuming that. I believe that's how most people are. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong, please. As Mike Maloney shows here in his Hidden Secrets of Money, episode 4, his 10 episodes he has are unbelievable. Channel number 4 is how the money is created. Again, videos on that coming soon. We have some other stuff posted about that already. But here again, currency is just being thrown into, as you see this big pool down here, currency is being thrown into this big pool, the economy, the market, and prices act as a sponge. That pool gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Prices have to absorb all that currency. So that's simply what it is. That's, like I said earlier, it's not greedy corporations. It's not, people are confusing things here. There's only one definition of inflation, and the government has changed it, like they have with CPI, Consumer Price Inflation Index, and many other definitions in life, which we won't go into, to obfuscate truth and gaslight you. Inflation itself is purely defined as expansion of the currency supply. That is it. The more currencies we have, like it says in the picture, the more prices will rise. This is where inflation comes from. The people are confusing supply and demand, and the politicians are as well. Some of them mean well, I'm sure. They just don't know. People are confusing supply and demand and the moves of prices up and down. And again, this is why we showed price. What's the difference between price and value? Because price and value can be very different as well. That's why it's very important to be able to see through these things and read through the lines, or read between the lines. Then you can see through the garbage that's being spewed everywhere and anywhere on media outlets, politicians, you name it. So people are getting these things confused. Rising prices are simply a symptom, as rising prices are merely a symptom, as Mike Maloney points out. Prices act as a sponge, absorbing all the currency that's been spilled into the system, like we noted. And then again, this chart here is shadow stats. John Williams has amazing sites, been tracking this for years. The 1980 base, he has a 1990 base, he has a bunch of so many different charts, real unemployment, all the different stuff there. I mean, I think we're like 20+% unemployment right now. It's showing real employment, how they used to measure things, based years ago, and then they changed all these things, like I said, to obfuscate truth. So if you go up the 1980 estimates of inflation, when we had huge inflations then, and you go through and actually look, and we had 15%, see how it was correlated right in the beginning, and then we started changing and screwing around with the inflation numbers, the CPI, and putting in different baskets, or putting in different things in the basket of goods, reweighting how things were done. So we have this disparity, just like the wealth gap, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're obfuscating, they're gaslighting you, they're showing you something different, because they know most people will not look into this. They know most people will not do their homework. They will not do anything. Let's believe the politicians, but you know differently. And this right now is showing us we're about 17% inflation, which makes about sense. We know we're not at 8 or 9. I mean, prices have doubled in a lot of cases, gone up 20, 30, 50% on a lot of things, a lot of goods, cars, energy, food, gas, you name it. And we're probably around 17%, 20%, somewhere in there. So this shows you, the control. There's no variables in this one, going from 1980 to now. So super important to see that. And then again, once you know the origins, why they want inflation, which I'm going to show you here in a second with the communists and their goals, our enemies' goals to destroy capitalism, destroy your freedom, destroy your liberty, your way of life. It all becomes clear as to why they're doing what they're doing. And then how do we fix that at the end? So secondly, I should say, some quotes from communists regarding inflation. This process is easily detected, inflation is, by anyone who is paying attention. I shouldn't say easily. It's not that easy to detect, but it takes a little bit of looking and homework, just being a diligent citizen. Inflation is used to simply enrich a few and destroy the middle class. When you have the power to create currency backed by nothing, it's literal theft from the people. Remember, our enemies do not want a strong middle class. This is where freedom and decentralization come from. That's why the middle class is so important. That's why America is so different. One of the main reasons, the big reasons that we are so different. Everywhere else in the world, you have these class systems or the caste systems, and there's just the rich and the poor, and the rich are able to just step on the necks of the poor always, and always has been that way. Hence, why we have so many write-ups, as I mentioned earlier, on communism and Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, the current globalists. This is the Great Reset they've been talking about. This is that currency reset, what they want, the central bank digital currencies, all these things flow together. If we understand this, then we can eradicate these people who have nothing but their own power-hungry intentions, have never done anything in their life but be activists and just jet around the world talking to each other and hobnobbing. And we can restore freedom, abundance, and liberty, not only in America, but it will sweep throughout the world. And not in the going to war way, just the Trojan horse, which, again, we'll talk about in a minute. John Maynard Keynes, about 100 years ago, and Lenin, I have here in a second. John Maynard Keynes, by a continuing process of inflation, government can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. And another quote by John Maynard Keynes, by this means the government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft. This is all regarding inflation. And then Vladimir Lenin in Russia about 100 years ago, the way to crush the bourgeoisie is to grind them between the millstones, the middle class, but grind them between the millstones of taxation and inflation. So rising property taxes, rising tax rates everywhere, and inflation. It's a silent tax. The real tax you see through government, and then the silent tax through central banks, them diluting your purchasing power and inflating it away. The best way, and then the last quote by Lenin, the best way to destroy the capitalist system is to botch the currency. So screw the currency up, and you screw up the Western way of life. You screw up capitalism. You screw up freedom. You screw up liberty. That is what the globalists want. That is what the elitists want. That is what the central bankers want. It's so beyond frustrating, and this is what creates so many of our ills. The wealth gap, the people that own assets. This is why for 5, 6, 7 years of doing content, I have been beating the table of get assets, acquire assets, gold, silver, Bitcoin, real estate, something to hedge and then outrun inflation, outrun this craziness, and then eventually deflation. Deflation will be the answer to all this at the end of the day. So I'm actually going to put that in here because that is really what it leads to and what's super important. How do we stop this madness? That's the real question. 1, get rid of central banks. Audit the Fed. Number 2, stop printing endless amounts of currency. It's going to be hell on earth, but it will be better in the long run. Let's do this for our kids, for our grandkids, our posterity, for freedom, for liberty. Number 3, stop spending more than we have as a people and as a country. Number 4, deflation and Bitcoin. Bitcoin is deflationary money, but get rid of the inflation by using this parallel system, this life raft, Bitcoin, where you can jump into a finite currency that continues to accrue value over time. And we'll talk more about storing the value and being an inflation hedge and being this alternative system that's being created. Apps, technology, everything being built on the Bitcoin blockchain that will radically transform life and usurp power, take it back from the elites. And I'll leave you with Corey Klippstein, Corey Klippstein is awesome and runs Swan Bitcoin, but just talks about inflation here really quickly. It's just beautifully said. Corey says, of course, these supply side dynamics have contributed to the current inflationary backdrop. Again, people confusing price with value and price with real inflation. Then he says, but what you really hear is these institutions admit that this inflation is primarily caused by the rapid expansion of federal debt financed by the Fed's printing press. Over the past decade, the U.S. government has been spending currency like no tomorrow, even running deficits in periods of economic expansion. The government's response to the pandemic simply put this trend into overdrive. Today, the massive amount of government spending is coming home to roost in the form of inflation. Policymakers now face a tough decision. Do they continue to spend and run large deficits, or do they protect everyday Americans from the harmful effects of inflation? What do you think is going to happen? Avik Roy argues in his article that it is impossible for policymakers to do both, and this conundrum will lead to Bitcoin becoming increasingly important in the future as that life raft to escape from the system. In these times, policymakers will be wise to remember the words of economist Milton Friedman that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Tick-tock, next block, as they say in the Bitcoin world. Corey Klippstein. Stay strong. Brandon signing off. Appreciate you guys more than anything. Tomorrow, like I said, we'll look at if Bitcoin truly is an inflation hedge it's built up to be, and is it a store of value? There's a lot of people that say it's not. In these crashes, they say that shows you why it's not. I'm going to show you exactly why it is, and I have the charts to prove it. So I appreciate you guys. If you got anything out of it, please share it. Please let someone know who might enjoy this, or maybe you don't enjoy it. Please give me a thumbs down. Comment why you don't like it, what you want to see. And your time, your attention, your energy is the most important asset we truly have. So thank you for spending with us. And we will see you on the next one.